Hey everybody, it's Chris, and today I am looking at the Unearthed Arcana for the Psion. In this video, I am looking at the spells and the feats. I was originally going to do 2 videos for these, but there's not that much stuff, so I think I can just make it one video. So this will be the last video for this Unearthed Arcana. If you want to see my videos for the base class or for the subclasses, check out my last 2 videos. And as I release this, it should be Monday, June 2nd, and the survey opens tomorrow. So I'm getting all this out before the survey opens up. But yeah, today we're going to just look at the spells printed in this Unearthed Arcana. Some of them are reprints. In fact, most of them are reprints. And then the feats that are all new. So we're going to start with Intellect Fortress. And this is a reprint. I will say that some of these reprints are mechanically identical to the previous versions, though they all have some wording changes, but mechanically no change. But there are a couple that do have mechanical changes. Intellect Fortress is one of the ones that does have a mechanical change, but it's very, very minor. So Intellect Fortress is an Artificer, Bard, Psion, Sorcerer, Warlock, and Wizard spell. I have to say, I probably wouldn't take this spell for most of those classes. It's an action to cast, 30-foot range, verbal component, concentration 1 hour. For the duration, one willing creature you can see within range has resistance to psychic damage, as well as advantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws. And you can upcast it. You can target one additional creature for each spell slot level above 3. Technically speaking, like I said, a very small change on this one. The original version said, in addition to being able to target one additional creature for each spell slot level above 3, it also said they all had to be within 30 feet of each other. That's been removed, so if you have one ally who's 30 feet this way and one ally who's 30 feet that way, they're not within 30 feet of each other. That's no longer a problem. That doesn't mean much in most cases, but the reason I wouldn't probably put this on most of these classes is this is pretty circumstantial for something that is using your concentration, and I'm not sure I would bother with it if I was an Artificer or a Bard or a Sorcerer or a Psion or a Warlock. For a Wizard, I'd probably be happy enough to have it in my spellbook, so if I knew I was going into a situation where I was going to have to make those saving throws, potentially facing, psychic damage, like I'm going into a Mind Flayer nest or something, then I would want to use my Modify Memory, get Intellect Fortress on my list, and then concentrate on it. Then it would be worth it. But it's a pretty high-level spell and concentration, one target, unless we upcast it to an even higher level spell. For the amount of times it's going to be worth that spell slot and the concentration, it probably can't be afforded on limited spells known. So if you're not a wizard with a spell book, it's going to be tough. But nevertheless, it is here, and it technically has a tiny boost to it. Then we have Psychic Scream. This is also a reprint. Now, if you're not aware of this one, it's from Xanathar's Guide to Everything. This is a 9th level spell, and it's actually a pretty good 9th level spell. It often gets overlooked because there are, of course, standout 9th level spells like Wish and such, True Polymorph, Shape Change, Prismatic Wall. So, Psychic Scream often gets overlooked, but it is actually a quite good spell. So it is an action to cast, 90-foot range. You can choose 10 creatures within range, and so no friendly fire, and creatures that have an intelligence score of 2 or lower are unaffected. That is going to be the minority of targets you would face. Each target makes an intelligence saving throw. That's the best saving throw to target. Pretty dramatically so, by the way, in the new Monster Manual. It's a better save to target than ever before. On a failed save, the target takes 14d6 psychic damage and has the stunned condition. The damage is not great for a 9th level spell. This is the same level. We have Meteor Swarm that does 40d6, but it's not mainly about the damage. It's mainly about the stun condition. You can get up to 10 creatures making their save against being stunned with one spell. That is pretty dramatic. On a successful save, the target takes half as much damage and they're not stunned. If the target is reduced to 0 hit points by this damage, its head explodes. That's fun. It's not just thematic. If there's somebody around with a Revivify spell or a Raise Dead spell, it won't work. And then at the end of each of its turns, a stunned target repeats the save, ending its condition on itself on a success. So if a creature doesn't have legendary resistance, and often minions don't, even at high level, then you could stun a bunch of enemies who, if they're not proficient in intelligence saving throws, which very, very few creatures are, and they don't have a high intelligence, which lots and lots of creatures don't, but they still have an intelligence above 2, which most creatures do, they could be basically stunned for good. But if you're selecting 9th level spells and you want to try something different, it's worth a try. And then we're going to get to Raulothim's Psychic Lance. So this one is a spell from Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, if I'm not mistaken. I didn't look that up before I started recording, but that's what I remember. Available to Bard, Scion, Sorcerer, Warlock, and Wizard, level 4. This one has not had any mechanical changes. It's an okay spell. I've seen it used very effectively. So 120-foot range. It is also an intelligence saving throw. Creature that fails their saving throw takes 76 psychic damage, which is not a lot for a 4th level spell, but it has the incapacitated condition until the start of your next turn. And that is the main reason you would cast this spell. You've got a spellcaster, they're concentrating on a spell, you hit them with this, they lose their concentration because they're incapacitated. There's all kinds of things that go down when a creature is incapacitated. Plus, they basically lose a round. They can't take any actions, any reactions. Basically, all they can do is move. And with a higher level spell slot, you basically add to the damage. That's not worth it. I wouldn't recommend upcasting this spell for anyone, but it's worth taking. I think it's a decent spell. Now we come to a brand new spell, Summon Astral Entity. This is going to look like a lot of spells, but it really reminds me of Summon Undead. So it's a level 3 conjuration, has all the standard summoning spell stuff for the base entry, and let's just look at the stat block. So we have a Psionic Spirit. I will note it's immune to psychic damage, not a big surprise for this kind of creature, but there's probably a play there where if you're going to deliver psychic damage and to an area of effect, then you could have the Psionic Spirit in there and not have to worry about them. You can choose a flying form with the ghostly entity. That's notable. The hit points of 40 plus 10 for each spell level above 3 is a little bit above average, so it's a little tankier than your standard summon spell. And we are going to get Incorporeal Passage for the Ectoplasmic Entity and Ghostly Entity, allowing them to move through creatures and objects as if they were difficult terrain. And then we're going to have the multi-attack, so if you cast it at level 3, they attack once, but every even spell level, they get an additional attack. So at level 4, 6, and 8, they get an additional attack. The Crystal Entity gets Crystal Strike, which is a melee attack, does a d10 plus 3, plus the spell's level. Ectoplasmic Splash is for the Ectoplasmic Entity. It's ranged, and the range is 30 feet, so not very far. D6 plus 3, plus the spell's level psychic damage, but each creature in a 5-foot emanation originating from it and including the target has its speed reduced by 5 feet until the end of its next turn, and that's on a hit or a miss. Not a big speed decrease, to be honest. I don't know if I'd bother with that just for a 5-foot speed decrease. And then Ephemeral Ray for the Ghostly Entity is a range attack roll with a 120-foot range for a d8 plus 3 plus the spell's level psychic damage. And if you choose the Crystal Entity, you get a reaction. It says the spirit is hit by a melee attack roll as the trigger. The response, the spirit halves the damage round down that it takes from that attack. The spirit can then teleport to an unoccupied space it can see within 30 feet of itself. Now remember that the crystal entity is the one that does melee attacks, so it is the one that is most likely in melee combat, so it's more likely to take attacks. So it gives it a little bit of a defense, so a little bit of a defensive boost for that option. The one that stands out to me is the ghostly entity. It can fly, it has incorporeal movement, and it has a ranged attack. And that's pretty good for any of the summon spells, never mind third level summon spells. So I think it's a decent summon spell for third level, well worth considering, and it is available for the Psion, the Sorcerer, the Warlock, and the Wizard. So if you are playing Sorcerers don't have a lot of summon options, so this is a big addition for them. For Warlock or Wizard, definitely a possible consideration rather than summon undead. All right, then we get to Tasha's Mind Whip. This is from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Very popular spell, and they nerfed it. And they nerfed it pretty hard. It's the only spell here that got a significant nerf. And so it's a level 2 spell, 90-foot range. You physically lash out at one creature you can see within range. The target must make an intelligence saving throw. On a failed save, the target takes 3d6 psychic damage, and it can't make opportunity attacks until the end of its next turn. That used to be, say, reactions. So now we are preventing opportunity attacks, which are one kind of reaction. But if you're facing a creature that has other kinds of reactions, this no longer prevents that. That I would consider a fairly minor nerf, but here comes the major one. Moreover, on its next turn, it can either take an action or a bonus action, not both. That used to say it can either move or take an action or a bonus action. The movement is no longer one of those three options, meaning that this doesn't affect their movement. So what would happen before is you would have a creature that does melee attacks. You hit it with Tasha's Mind Whip. It has nobody within reach. Well, it cannot move and attack. So it can move up to somebody, or if it had something else to do with its actions, it could do something else. Maybe it just dodges or something. But what you could often do is you could prevent that creature from making its attacks. But now it can still move and take the action. So unless it has bonus actions, the only real loss to it is the loss of opportunity attacks and the 3d6 damage. And this spell is definitely not worth it for 3d6 damage. I mean, we have first level spells that do more damage than that. So that is a pretty severe nerf to Tasha's Mind Whip, to the point where I think casting it on a lot of creatures would be almost useless. And there are very few creatures that I think will be significantly hindered by this. So I am not a fan. I think they've gone way too far in nerfing this spell. In fact, I'm not sure Tasha's Mind Whip was a problem to begin with. Doing the opportunity attacks instead of the reactions, I totally understand that, because we have more and more creatures that have a variety of reactions and often more than one reaction, and being able to just turn that off is maybe too much. But the main thing this did is it had them make that choice between move, bonus action, action. Now it's either bonus action or action. I mean, most creatures will choose their action even if they have a bonus action, because usually the bonus action is pretty minor, and a lot of creatures don't have bonus actions at all, so they're really not affected. That's a pretty awful nerf, I think. I would never take this spell in this form, and I just can't imagine why anyone would. So that's too much, obviously, right? If you're going to nerf it, maybe look at reducing the damage. But removing the movement penalty, I think makes this spell next to useless. But anyway, let's talk about a new spell, Telekinetic Crush. So this is available to Psions, Sorcerers, and Warlocks. 1 action casting time, 120-foot range. You create a field of crushing telekinetic force in a 30-foot cube within range. So that's 30-foot cube is the same size as a hypnotic pattern. Each creature in the area makes a strength saving throw. Now, strength saving throws aren't bad to target. It's about the same as targeting most other saving throws, to be honest. Charisma and intelligence tend to be the good saving throws to target, but strength is fine. On a failed save, target takes 5d6 force damage, which isn't a lot for a 3rd level spell, and has the prone condition. On a successful save, target takes half as much damage only and isn't prone. If you upcast it, you do an additional d6 per spell level. So you wouldn't do this for the damage. Just remember that a fireball does 8d6 damage. Now, force damage is more reliable than fire damage, a lot more reliable than fire damage. But the main thing here, I think, is that you're knocking them prone. Now, the thing about prone is you want to make sure that knocking them prone is a good thing. If you're in range combat with some enemies and you knock them all prone, you might not be helping yourself at all. But where I could see this being very helpful is against flying enemies. Because unless a flying enemy has hover, if you knock it prone, it falls to the ground. So I think Telekinetic Crush will be very useful for that. And then we go on to Telekinetic Fling, and this is a new cantrip. And this will be the last spell. So this is 60-foot range, and you brandish the ammunition used to cast a spell and fire it at a creature within range using psionic energy. You make a ranged spell attack against the target. On a hit, they take a d10 force damage, and the ammunition is destroyed, and we have our standard cantrip scaling. So the damage here of a d10 with scaling is pretty good, and the range is on the low side. So for most spells that require attack rolls that are ranged, we're looking at either 60, 90, or 120 foot range. So this is on the low side for that. The damage is fine. The damage type is good. There is the possibility, I've been discussing with people whether this works or not, and I would check with your DM, but if you have special ammunition, you may get the benefits of that as well. I think it's an okay cantrip. I don't think it is a standout cantrip, but I don't think it's a bad cantrip either. It's kind of in the middle. So, if I was playing a Psion, which is the only class this is available to, I'd be inclined to take this because it is their range cantrip option. And those are the spells. So overall, I'm fine with these spells, except for Tasha's Mind Whip. Tasha's Mind Whip, I think, the nerf there, they just went way too far. Tasha's Mind Whip was definitely an above average spell, so if they wanted to nerf it a little bit, I can understand that, but the nerf they made was just brutal. If they want to make it a little less powerful, maybe make it 2d6 base damage instead of 3d6, and it would still be a good spell then. But as it is, I do not consider it a good spell anymore. So I hope they change that before they come up with the official edition. All right, so now we're going to talk about the feats. And these feats are wild talent feats. And at the very start of this document, I'll bring that up. They say wild talents also included are a collection of feats that provide characters with a way to tap into psionic powers. Backgrounds representing their connection to wild talents will be included with these feats in a future book if they become official. But in the meantime, a character who takes the noble or sage background can choose a wild talent feat in place of that background's origin feat, and any character can choose one of these feats when their class would normally allow a feat choice. So these are not going to be just origin feats. Like with Dragonlance, we have certain backgrounds in Dragonlance that give you access to the Dragonlance feats. Now, in Dragonlance, you can also choose a number of other backgrounds that can give you access to those feats as well as origin feats. Here, I'm not sure if that's the case or not. The way they talk about Noble or Sage, they're basically saying, for now, use them. So you may have to take the backgrounds in that book in order to get these feats at level 1. But anyone could choose them at level 4 or above. I don't think they're as good as general feats because they don't include an ability score bonus. But anyways, let's take a look at them. So we're going to start with Atmokinesis. That's how I'm going to pronounce it. And with all of these, it says wild talent feat prerequisite can't have another wild talent feat. So you can only take one of these in any case. You gain the following benefits. Lightning Jolt. Once per turn, when you cast a spell or hit with an attack roll and deal bludgeoning, piercing, slashing, or psychic damage, you can change the damage type to lightning damage. Now, where I could see this being useful is if you are making a lightning specialist. Tempest clerics come to mind. If I'm playing a Tempest cleric, having a way to do reliable lightning damage round after round could be very good, especially at higher levels once you start, pushing any creature that you do lightning damage to. Never mind the fact that you can, if you cast a spell that delivers lightning damage, you can maximize it. So that kind of thing. And we're going to have a few of these feats that specialize to a certain damage type. In all those cases, I think you'd be looking for the kind of character that wants to specialize in that damage type. And of course, it makes particular feats like Elemental Affinity that much better. So that's the first thing we get with it. Then it says Psionic Talent. The Shocking Grasp cantrip, which isn't a great cantrip, but if you're in melee and looking for a melee cantrip, it's okay. You also always have the Fog Cloud spell prepared. Fog Cloud can be a very good spell. It depends. You can cast it once without a spell slot. You gain the ability to cast it that way when you finish a long rest. You can also cast it using any spell slot you have of the appropriate level, so that's standard stuff. And I'm not going to read that word for word in the future feats that have the same wording. When you cast these spells, they require no verbal or material components, and Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma is your spellcasting ability for them. Choose when you select the feat. When you reach character level 3, you also always have the Gust of Wind spell prepared, which I think is very so-so, and you can cast it the same way. Overall, like I said, if you want to specialize in lightning damage, this feat is for you. If you don't, probably not worth it. And then we have Biokinesis. So we start with Bend Life Energy. When you cast a spell that restores hit points to a creature, you can roll a d4 and add the number rolled to the hit points restored. That's not a lot. You can use this benefit a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus, and you'll gain all expended uses when you finish a long rest. So not a lot, and not very many times. So Bend Life Energy, I don't think it's all that great. Then we have the Psionic Talent. The Spare the Dying cantrip? That can be useful. You also always have the Healing Word spell prepared. Healing Word is a good spell. You can cast it once without a spell slot, and you gain the ability to cast that way when you finish a long rest. And of course, you can apply your D4 to your Healing Word if you like. You can also cast it using any spell slot you have of the appropriate level when you cast these spells, blah, blah, blah. When you reach character level 3, you always have the Arcane Vigor spell prepared. That's a self-healing spell in the player's handbook, and you can cast it the same way. I should mention Arcane Vigor uses up your hit dice, though. But it's a bonus action spell. So the Psionic Talent part, like the extra spells, Spare the Dying, Healing Word, and Arcane Vigor, might make this worth it. The Bend Life Energy, then, is just kind of a little ribbon to throw on top of that. So if you want to make a character that can have some healing options, and you have spell slots, so you want to expand your Psion or your Wizard or your Sorcerer so that they can do some healing, this might be a feat for you. Then we have Clairsentience. All right, so when you take the search action, and the search action is basically a bunch of wisdom skills, right? Like perception and insight and that kind of thing. You can give yourself advantage on any ability check made as part of that action. You can use this benefit a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus, and you regain all expended uses when you finish a long rest. Then we get Psionic Talent, Guidance. That's a good cantrip. You also know Detect Evil and Good, which is pretty circumstantial. It's not terrible. And then it says at level 3, let's move this, you always have See Invisibility prepared. Again, very circumstantial, but I guess having it as a free preparation could be useful. The spell list there isn't great. Guidance is good. And, the search action, if I'm playing a Psion, then Wisdom isn't my primary ability score. So my Wisdom is probably not going to be all that great. So specializing in Wisdom skills wouldn't be my first instinct. But I think between the talent and the feat, you could do that if you wanted to. So I think it's okay for a particular concept of character, not something I'd gravitate to necessarily with a Psion. But with a specialist character, I could see it. Then Cryokinesis. So this is going to look a lot like The lightning one, once per turn, when you cast a spell or hit with an attack roll and deal bludgeoning, piercing, slashing, or psychic damage, you can change the damage type to cold damage. And then you get Ray of Frost, you get Armor of Agathis, that's a good spell, and Ice Knife, which is not a good spell, and all the same mechanics. Again, if I want to specialize in cold damage for some reason, this is a good way to do it. Like if I was going to play a Draconic Sorcerer, I'd consider taking this because all my psychic spells or spells that might deal bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage, some do, right? Things like Clouded Daggers and such. We can have them all do cold damage, and, you know, if I want to be the cold damage Draconic Sorcerer, then that would give me a few more options, because unless you're a fire Draconic Sorcerer, you don't have a lot of spell options. So, you know, these feats are a way that could be opened up. Then we have Empath. Let's bring that up. So it gives us Emotional Sense. When you take the Influence action, which is going to be Charisma-based skills, you can give yourself advantage on any ability check made as part of that action. You can use it a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus per long rest. And I'll say the same thing as I did with the Search action. Not the ability score that we're probably focusing on as a Psion, though we might take this with a non-Psion. If you really want to focus on that kind of check, this might be a good option for you. But for the average Psion, it's probably not something I would be drawn towards. And then Psionic Talent, you have the Charm Person spell, and same, you know, stuff. And then we get Calm Emotions at level 3. Calm Emotions is a decent spell. I think an overlooked spell often, but it suppresses some conditions that are very nice. Charm Person, I find that one's tough. That one's tough because, you know, you always have the issue where if the creature makes their saving throw, it can create more problems than you were ever going to solve with it. So I'm not a huge fan of Charm Person, but yeah, if I wanted to make, you know, that character that really focused on social interaction, this might be an option. Then we have Flesh Morpher, and it says when we make a Dexterity, Acrobatics, or Sleight of Hand check, we gain a bonus equal to our Intelligence modifier minimum of +1. You can use this benefit a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus, and you regain all expended uses when you finish a long rest. I find it interesting that they have some of these feats give you advantage on certain checks, and then we have other feats that give us a bonus equal to our Intelligence modifier. And I'm wondering why they went, you know, one way some of the time and this other way some other times. And I'm wondering if it's like an A/B test where they're waiting to see which is more popular in the survey. That could be the case. Because I think it would be odd for them to publish where half of them give advantage and half of them give Intelligence modifier bonus. The thing I do like here is this is obviously going to be in a source book that features the Psion, so I'd be thinking Psion first, and their primary ability is Intelligence. So we would take Acrobatics and Sleight of Hand with a Psion, and adding our Intelligence modifier would be a big deal. It could make us actually quite good at those things, especially if we have a decent Dexterity. And I think the average Psion will have a pretty good Dexterity because they don't have armor proficiency. So I think that's pretty good. And then we're going to get the Longstrider spell, which is a good spell. And then we are also going to get Alter Self at level 3, which I've talked about on this channel before. I'm not a fan. But overall, I think this is pretty good if you want to be really good at Acrobatics and Sleight of Hand, and you are Intelligence-based. The one thing about making it Intelligence-based is good for a Psion, not necessarily good for any character. It depends how good your Intelligence is. But for a Wizard, might also be quite good, or an Artificer. Then we move on to Mind Whisperer. As a magic action, you choose a creature you can see within 120 feet of yourself, and you form a telepathic connection to that creature for 1 hour. And you can communicate with them as long as you're within 120 feet of each other, and you must mentally use a language the other knows. And you can do it once per short or long rest. That's so minor, right? This would be a ribbon feature if it was on a class or a subclass feature list. Then we have Psionic Talent. We get Mind Sliver, which is okay. That's a pretty good cantrip. above average, I'd say. And the Dissonant Whispers spell. I know a lot of people are really into Dissonant Whispers. I think it's okay, but I don't think it's great. And you can cast it once without a spell slot, blah, 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 usual stuff. If you really like Dissonant Whispers and you couldn't get it otherwise, I mean, Mind Sliver is solid. So this might be worth it, but I have to say the limited telepathy does not appeal to me all that much at all. Keep in mind there's a telepathic feat that gives you better telepathy than this, and it is a general feat, and it gives you some other stuff as well, including the Detect Thoughts spell that you can cast without components. So, I just think there's quite a difference beyond just the ability score bonus that telepathic gives you. So I'm not a huge fan of this one. I could see, if you want to play that kind of character, maybe it's worth it. But I think if you want to play that kind of character, there's a good chance you're going to get telepathy anyways. So I don't know. Then we have Psi Trickster. So we get Cunning Mind. When you make a Charisma, Deception, or Persuasion check, you get your Intelligence modifier. So again, this is not an advantage one. It's an Intelligence modifier one. So if we want to play a psionic character that has good social interactions, and I think that does fill a certain fantasy, then Deception and Persuasion become good skills for you if you have Psi Trickster. That might be good for certain concepts. And we're also going to get the Minor Illusion cantrip, which is a good cantrip, and Disguise Self spell, which is a decent spell, depending on what we're going to do with it. But it does have nice synergy with what we're getting, like the Deception skill boost on with Disguise Self. Those things might go together, right? So there's some nice synergy there. So if we're wanting to play like a spy character or something like that, I could see taking this feat. And then we've got Psykineticist. And so when we take the dash action, we can increase our speed by 10 feet until the start of our next turn. Number of times equal to our proficiency bonus. We regain all expended uses when we finish a long rest. Now, I love movement speed bonuses. I talk about that regularly on this channel as I'm reviewing things. You probably noticed that, if it gives movement bonuses, I'm usually a fan. But when you limit it to only the dash action, I am much less of a fan. I think that becomes a very minor ribbon. And then we're going to get Telekinetic Fling, which, as I mentioned previously in this video, is okay. And the Thunderwave spell, which at level 1 I think is a decent feat, or a decent spell. So when we first get this, assuming we take it at level 1, I think Thunderwave will be helpful. But it won't stay helpful. Thunderwave is one of those spells that it just doesn't level up to snuff. Like, you get additional D8 damage per spell level, but the area is small and it's right beside you, and it just doesn't keep up with the better blast spells. So I don't think Thunderwave is a big addition here unless you're like playing a one shot and you're level 1 or 2. Telekinetic Fling is okay. If you don't have a ranged attack cantrip and you want one, it'll fill the bill. And then the dash action with the increased speed, I think, is a ribbon. Overall, I think this is a pretty weak feat. Not a fan of it. And then we have Pyrokinesis. Okay, so for Psions, this is classic, right? If you think of Stephen King's Firestarter, that's Pyrokinesis. So there is definitely a fantasy for this. Once per turn, when you cast a spell or hit with an attack roll and deal bludgeoning, piercing, slashing, or psychic damage, you can change the damage type to fire damage. And we're going to get Produce Flame, which is an okay cantrip. Used to be a terrible cantrip, but since 2024, they updated it, and it's fine now. Burning Hands. This is similar to Thunderwave, where at level 1, it might be okay. In fact, I consider it actually worse than Thunderwave, even though it targets a better saving throw, because it's actually a smaller area and it doesn't have the secondary effect of pushing. So at level 1 and 2, Burning Hands might be okay. By level 3, you don't want to be casting Burning Hands anymore. And Produce Flame is an okay cantrip. So we're also going to get Scorching Ray, by the way, when we get to level 3. And just like with Burning Hands, I'd say at level 3, Scorching Ray is decent, but it doesn't stay decent. There are certain combinations you can do Scorching Ray, like maybe you get Conjure Minor Elementals, and then you're casting Scorching Ray, then it can be okay. But on its own, unenhanced, it's okay at level 3. and level 4, but you know, we're just going to do a lot better later on. And there's a certain point where I also think it falls behind Chromatic Orb that's upcast. So yeah, a Pyrokinesis, I think, again, if that's the character that you're looking for, it fills the bill. And that's it. That's all the spells and all the feats, and I've now covered everything in this Unearthed Arcana. So if you've watched my videos, you have all the information that, you know, don't just take my opinions for things. Form your own opinions, maybe listen to what I said and consider it. But the survey opens on June 3rd, so if you want your say here, that's your chance to do so. I encourage all my viewers to fill it out if they care at all about this particular document and what might be coming for the official game. So thank you for joining me. And otherwise, until next time, I am going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.